Bonjour. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to this special hybrid event, broadcast live from two cities, Montreal and Winnipeg in friendly Manitoba. My name is Paul Chesser, and I have the pleasure of serving as Vice President Advancement at Concordia. I'm also a proud two-time graduate and a proud parent of a Concordia student. I'm joined at the Austin Taka Student Center with Concordia President Graham Carr, as well as a number of alumni, colleagues, and friends. In Winnipeg, we are joined by Alan Vicaire, Senior Advisor of Concordia's Indigenous Directions, students Aidan Kondo and Mavis Pukacic, and today's inductee, the Honourable Murray Sinclair. J'aimerais commencer par reconnaître que l'Université Concordia est située en territoire autochtone, lequel n'a jamais été cédé. The Gunyagahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tujage, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is a home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour la remise de la médaille Loyola, un des prix les plus prestigieux de Concordia. Today's honoree, our 23rd Loyola Medal recipient, joins us virtually from the Winnipeg Art Gallery. As such, I would like to acknowledge that the Winnipeg Art Gallery is located on Treaty Number 1, the lands and waters of the Anishinaabe, the Inuiaq, the Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. As our highest non-academic award, the Loyola Medal was established by the Loyola Alumni Association and Loyola College in 1961. The medal honors and celebrates outstanding citizens who've made a significant contribution to Canada and beyond. Concordia counts more than 240,000 alumni in more than 150 countries. It is a network that spans the world and extends multiple decades. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes fiers d'accueillir un ajout important à la famille Concordia. We're very proud to welcome a new member of the Concordia family. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to the Honourable Murray Sinclair. It is a privilege to have you here, and we will hear shortly from His Honor. In the meantime, I want to thank the volunteer members of the Loyola Medal Selection Committee for their hard work and dedication. John Lineburner, Honora Shaughnessy, Sheila O'Neill, Don Taddeo, and Joseph Leger. Je vous remercie. I'd now like to invite Concordia President Graham Carr to the podium to give remarks and begin the medal ceremony.
Merci Paul et bienvenue à toutes et à tous. Je suis ravi de vous voir ici en personne au Centre étudiant Ottahocta de Concordia à Montréal. I'm joined by John Lineburner, President of the Loyola Founding Chapter and Chair of the Loyola Medal Nominating Committee. And I also want to welcome all of you who are joining us today online. Thanks for being with us for what is a truly illustrious occasion for our university. And of course, it's an immense privilege to welcome our guest of honor, the Honourable Murray Sinclair, who, as Paul said, is joining us from the Winnipeg Art Gallery. Avant de vous parler un peu plus de Monsieur le juge Sinclair, je vais vous présenter rapidement les membres de l'équipe de Concordia qui se joignent à lui aujourd'hui à Winnipeg. First, let me introduce Concordia's Senior Advisor of Indigenous Directions, Alan Vicaire. Alan is Mi'kmaq from the Listagouche community. He's a Concordia alumnus and a key member of the team piloting the successful implementation of our university's Indigenous Directions Action Plan. Alan has shared his expertise at a number of local, national, and international conferences on topics ranging from raising the profile of Indigenous affairs at a large university such as ours to engaging Indigenous youth through culturally rooted science initiatives. Mavis Pukashish is from Waswanipi, Cree Nation in Iaishchi, also known as James Bay, Quebec. She's working on her Bachelor's of Arts in First Peoples Studies here at Concordia, where she's also a project manager for Indigenous communities at Youth Fusion. Youth Fusion is an incredible organization, started by a Concordia grad, I have to add, that aims to spark the passion of youth through experiential learning. And Aidan Kondo is Mi'kmaq from the community of Gesgabegia. He's pursuing a major in First Peoples Studies and a minor in Law and Society. Aidan also works in Concordia's Office of Indigenous Directions, where as the events coordinator, he helps highlight and celebrate Indigenous cultures. And Aidan was also a member of our Garnet Key Society, one of the most prestigious student associations on campus. Together, Alan, Mavis, and Aidan will hold a panel discussion with Justice Sinclair after the presentation of the Loyola Medal, and I'm going to proceed with that now. Those of you who are familiar with Concordia's history will know that our university has long been known for its commitment to promoting equal opportunity, social justice, and service to society. This is, in part, a legacy of our founding institutions, Sir George Williams University and Loyola College. The history of the Loyola Medal exemplifies this. Created in 1961, the Loyola Medal was designed to pay tribute to extraordinary individuals who embody humanitarian values. Il s'agit d'une haute distinction que nous ne décernons pas souvent, tous les 2 ans environ. Bon nombre des personnalités qui la reçoivent sont bien connues du public. Madame Thérèse Casgrain, Jean Béliveau, Clara Hughes, Oscar Peterson, et assez récemment, Samantha Nutt. Like them, Justice Sinclair has made a profound mark on our society, having spent his entire career in public service on behalf of Indigenous peoples and all Canadians. A member of the Ojibwe First Nation, Murray Sinclair graduated from the University of Winnipeg in sociology with a minor in history. He then spent his early career as a social worker at the Friendship Center in his hometown of Selkirk, Manitoba. While there, he helped many Indigenous families find social services and housing. For support with urgent cases, he would often call his local MLA, Howard Pauley, a young lawyer and rising star in Manitoba's New Democratic Party, who I'm sure many of you know would then go on to be premier. Lorsque M. Pauley est devenu procureur général de la province, il a demandé à Maurice Sinclair d'être son adjoint administratif. Working for Pauley set Justice Sinclair on the path to law school, where his goals were guided by the words of his grandmother, "Whatever it is you do, you have to do something to help people." As a lawyer, he focused primarily on civil and criminal litigation, Indigenous law, and human rights. In 1988, he became Manitoba's first and Canada's second Indigenous judge. He was soon named co-commissioner of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, an investigation into systemic racism in the province's criminal justice system. Cette expérience des plus éclairantes l'a préparé à ce qui allait devenir la réalisation phare de sa carrière, assurer la présidence de la Commission de vérité et réconciliation. When one thinks of public service in our country, there are few more poignant examples than Justice Sinclair, who devoted 6 years of his career to chairing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which heard from more than 6,500 survivors and witnesses of the residential school system across Canada. The undertaking was monumental and revelatory, but it was also profoundly disturbing and deeply traumatic for all who participated. Value-driven and determined to get to the truth of the past, Justice Sinclair emphasized how the goals of sharing, consensus building, and healing would shape the Commission's work. Demonstrating incredible personal strength, conviction, perseverance, and leadership, he challenged all Canadians to learn, reflect upon, and confront this country's long history of oppression, violence, and discrimination against Indigenous peoples. Today, as an act of recognition, we honor Justice Sinclair with the Loyola Medal. But frankly, as an institution that has been a standard bearer for progressive thought, the question with which we at Concordia also need to reckon is why it took more than 60 years to bestow this high honor on an Indigenous person. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report and its 94 calls to action have resonated across this country. Some of those calls to action are specific to the university sector, and I can say with confidence that at Concordia, they have been instrumental in helping to orient our own Indigenous Directions Action Plan, including putting the accent on action. Last year, Justice Sinclair retired from Canada's Senate after 5 years of service, and he continues to mentor young Indigenous lawyers. As a tireless advocate, not just for truth and justice, but also for education, action, and reconciliation in a world where there are so many forces desperate to tear us apart, Justice Sinclair is, in all respects, emblematic of what the Loyola Medal aims to honor. Our pride, our honor in welcoming Justice Sinclair as a Concordian today could not be greater. And finally, I think it's immensely fitting that a medal struck by past generations of our university's alumni be bestowed on Justice Sinclair by Mavis and Aidan, two outstanding students who represent not just the next generation of Concordia alumni, but who, through their own volunteerism, through their own activism, embody core values that drive our university. So I'll now hand things over to the team in Winnipeg for the bestowing of the medal. Thank you.
Congratulations. As we prepare for the Honourable Murray Sinclair's remarks, I want to take a moment to acknowledge other notable Loyola Medal recipients that his honor joins today. The late Jacques Ménard became the 14th Loyola Medal recipient in 2009. In addition to his work as chairman of BMO Nesbitt Burns and president of BMO Financial Group, Quebec, Medal was a longtime supporter of Concordia and a civic leader for Montreal. Senator Romeo Delaire was bestowed this honor in 2006. The former Canadian senator was recognized for his instrumental work in government and as a soldier and peace activist. In 2009, Canada's first female astronaut and the world's first neurologist in space, Dr. Roberta Bondar, was awarded the medal. She was chosen for representing the ideals and spirit of liberal arts and scientific education that characterized Loyola College. And now let us turn to our most recent Loyola Medal recipient, the Honourable Murray Sinclair. Justice Sinclair.
Bonjour, le Kanasatuk, le Zenegijik, and the Zenikas. Bonjour à tous. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the great honor that's been bestowed upon me to Concordia University. And I want to extend my congratulations to Concordia as well for continuing to uphold those values, those important traditions that hold us so dearly accountable to the people of this country, to the citizens of the world, for the things that we do, for the things that we need to do, and to try to ensure that the world that we are part of is the more representative of the values that we have been born to. So I do want to thank you for this great honor that's been bestowed upon me, because it means so much to me to be recognized in this way. I want to also acknowledge all of those people who have taken the time and the effort to ensure that I'm taken care of and provided for as I continue this work. My family allows me to do this. Of course, they could insist that I hold to the commitment I gave to them when I left the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that is to give up public life and to be more family-oriented. And in ways, they turned that table on me by becoming involved in everything I do. So as a result, I'm often accompanied by my family with one or the other of my daughters or my son being there with me. And of course, my wife accompanies me whenever she can as well, because it's important for us to recognize that in the same way that we regard our family, in the same way that we hold our family so close to us, we should also hold close all of those citizens of this country, because we have to stand up for them, those of us who can and have things to say. I also want to indicate that we still have a long way to go when it comes to achieving the ambitions of the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But we said at the time that we issued the report that it was not going to be easy, that we were going to face those who would continue to deny the truth of what it was that we discovered, and those who would resist a process of reconciliation which they might fear would involve them somehow giving up what they have. But it is more a question of, when we reconcile, what is it that we can do in order to be able to establish the kind of relationship that would have been in place had this long period of oppression, this long period of attempted cultural genocide not occurred. If we had been allowed to continue to coexist with each other for these many generations, what would this place look like? It would be a different place. And we in our communities would be different people. We would not be suffering from the kinds of pains and anguishes that we now see around us. We would not be seeing the kinds of events that we saw in Saskatchewan just last week, where so much anger was taken out on a community by a person who himself was a victim of the trauma of the residential school system, because his family had been traumatized while they were there and had been so badly affected. We know that we're going to continue to see some of the dire consequences of that existence, but within the Indigenous community, we know that there is a process of reconciliation that also needs to take place. as there is a process of reconciliation that needs to take place within the non-Indigenous community. And by doing that, it is to recognize that this history that we have identified in the work of the TRC has affected us both in different ways, but we are now living the consequences of the impact of that history. Those who have been the beneficiaries of the government actions and society's actions of the past must recognize that there is a privilege that goes with it that includes doing what you can to help those who have been trodden upon, those who have been disenfranchised, and those who have been the victims of the legislation and the laws that have been put in place for so many years. As I say, we have a long way to go, because when we do those things that stop that kind of activity from occurring, we must recognize that there is still the consequences of the things that have arisen from the realities of the past, and we have to deal with those as well. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is a true path to reconciliation, and we have endorsed it in the work of the TRC, and I commend it to your reading. But I also want to say to you that if you do read it, you will see that if you think for a moment of what it would be like and what it would have been like if this had happened to your family, to your generations of ancestors, this is the kind of activity that the UN Declaration talks about. These are the kinds of obligations that it talks about that you would also want for your families as well. So we do need to understand that this is not something that is going to disappear overnight. This is not something that's going to reconcile itself overnight, but at the same time, it's something that can reconcile itself if we both sides make a commitment to doing so. Thank you very much once again for recognizing the work that I do and have done. And I also want to thank you for now bringing me into your community, to sharing your life with me. And in my way, I will come and visit among you and share my life with you. And I look forward to the opportunities to do that. Miigwech Nikanasituk. Thank you, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Your Honor. We are honored to have you join our community. On behalf of all of us, might I offer you a hearty welcome. As they prepare for the setting up the panel discussion in Winnipeg, it's my pleasure now to call upon John Limeburner, President of the Loyola Alumni Founding Chapter and Chair of the Loyola Medal Selection Committee, to say a few words. John?
Thank you, Paul. Bonjour. Greetings to all. I echo Paul's sentiments about the importance of today's ceremony. My sincere thanks to you, Your Honor, for your inspiring words and for your meaningful work. Nous sommes fiers de vous octroyer la médaille Loyola. Welcome to our Loyola and Concordia family. Your Honor, you have been described as a visionary leader, a transformative figure, and one of the great moral forces in Canadian life. Your commitment to the betterment of humanity, one shared by our university, makes you an ideal candidate for the Loyola Medal. Concordia is known for promoting equal opportunity, social justice, and service to society, part of the DNA of Loyola College, one of Concordia's founding institutions. La médaille Loyola reconnaît les humanitaires extraordinaires qui illustrent ses qualités. Your Honor, your ability to spark needed conversations and the ripple effect of such dialogues demonstrate the global impact one voice can make. You have stressed in past reflections that education is what got us here, and education is what will get us out. While my sense is that education in this context is pre-post-secondary, I would submit that universities have an equally an increasingly important role on the road to reconciliation. Indeed, every person taking part in this ceremony has a role in that journey and can and should certainly be an agent for change. I understand that the publication of your upcoming book, Who Are We?, is imminent. I, for one, look forward to reading it, and I encourage all of us to do the same. We wish you all the best as you continue to shape a better world. On behalf of our community and those on whom you continue to advocate, thank you. Vous êtes une source d'inspiration pour nous tous. I also want to extend my gratitude to the Loyola Medal Selection Committee for their exceptional efforts and contributions. Honor O'Shaughnessy, Sheila O'Neill, Don Tadeo, Joseph Leger, Alicia Lecouvi, and Paul Chesser, two names that Paul omitted earlier, as well as Aeneas Lauriston, who guided us through the process. You did wonderful work, fantastic work, as evidenced by the presentation today. Thank you all. Merci et bon après-midi. Miigwech.
Thank you, John. We're getting ready to turn this over to friendly Manitoba again. Nous allons maintenant laisser la parole à l'Honourable Marie Sinclair, Alain Vicaire, Aidan Kondo, and Mavis Pukachich. Alan, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. I extend my congratulations to you, Your Honor. I am excited and honored to be here. My name is Alan Vicaire, and I'm the Senior Advisor of Indigenous Directions at Concordia. I spent more than 10 years working in Indigenous education, specifically higher education. And during that time, I've witnessed important progress. Yet, I feel and a little shocked at how little progress we've actually made. Indigenous students are facing the same barriers as they once did 2 decades ago, especially when I was a student. The systems in place have not prepared them for post-secondary education. Many students suffer from culture shock and isolation during their university studies. And as much as we like to think things are changing, what's for certain is much change is needed. As the first Indigenous judge appointed in the province of Manitoba and the Chancellor of Queen's University, I want to get his thoughts on how he sees us breaking through these barriers. So I turn to Aidan Kondo to ask the first question to the Honourable Marie Sinclair. Let us get started.
Thank you, Alan. To give the audience an opportunity to learn a bit more about you, what inspired you to devote your life to work intentionally for justice and Indigenous rights?
Well, it had to do with the fact that one of the most important people in my life during the time that I was developing my career was Howard Pawley, who went on to become the Premier of Manitoba and, of course, a university educator as well. And Howard was a special individual. He was a kind man. He was quite decent in his thinking and quite inclusive in his thinking about the decision-making that he had to do. He was recognized as being a person upon whom a lot of pressure was placed because of the politics of the things that were going on in Manitoba. But the way he handled that was always with a sense of calm and coolness, and that kept him in tune with his own sense of direction, and also with the importance of what it was that he was doing, because he set out to be the
the best person that he could be and in whatever it was that he did. And so those attributes I thought were very important, and I saw that, and he encouraged me to go to law school. I had already been to the University of Winnipeg, of course, and was working at the Friendship Center when he asked me to come and work for him. And I thought working for him would be a really interesting way to see the province and to see what was going on in the province. But I didn't anticipate that it was going to lead to a decision to go to law school. And it took him about 4 years of convincing me that law school was in my future and that it's something I should do. And so I did finally make the decision. And he not only convinced me to go and the importance of it, but he also convinced me that I could do it. And so in those moments when I was at law school, when I thought, why is this worth it? Because we were studying Western law, we were studying European-based law. We were not talking about the issues that were important to me in terms of the Indigenous community, the Indigenous thinking about law, the concepts of law. We were only talking about it in terms of the British common law system. We didn't even study the French civil system, but the British common law system, it occurred to me at a later point in my career as some important elements that are very similar to the Indigenous law system. And so law school proved to give me a good foundation in terms of my subsequent thinking about Indigenous law and where Indigenous law can fit into the system of justice that we have in this country. And so going into become a law was really I saw it initially as an intellectual challenge, but at the same time, I always remembered what my grandmother told me, which was that I have to use that knowledge to help people. And so I continued to volunteer, do what I could to help people in the various committees that I joined, but I didn't know that I would be able to have the impact that I had as a lawyer or the impact that I would have as a judge until those opportunities came about. And it really is as well an understanding that when you have those opportunities to do good, you must never turn them down. You must never avoid them. And when the opportunities came before me, the opportunity to go and work for a particular firm or to take on a particular client, for example, was one that initially you see as in a particular way as an undertaking that might be very demanding, but at the same time, I saw most of those opportunities as the opportunity to do good, to do right, to help somebody. And many of my clients were not well represented by non-Indigenous lawyers in court. And so I made a point to ensure that what I knew about them and what I knew about their background, what I knew about the history of Indigenous people in this country and in this province was made known to the court. Judges weren't always listening. And so I used to have my fights with them. But then the one thing I learned, incidentally, about being, while I was in law school, but certainly when I came out of law school, was I like a good fight. I liked going into court, and I liked arguing, and I liked debating, and I liked arguing with judges. And so I used to relish the opportunity to go in and fight what appeared to be a losing case because I knew there was a sound principle there that was worth either defending or advocating. So I really took a shine to that element of the process, and I became good at it. So that when I was asked initially to become a judge, I declined. I said no because I like being a lawyer too much, and they asked me 3 times, and I said no. And it was on the 3rd time that actually, Phil Fontaine, Elijah Harper, and a number of other Indigenous leaders took me to lunch, and they said, you have to do it. because we have never had an Indigenous judge in Manitoba. And if you do it, then it'll open the door for the others who are just as capable to be able to do it as well. And I said, yeah, okay, I understand that. And when I talked to my law partner, he said, well, you know, after a couple of years, if you decide that the time is right, then you can always come back and practice law. So I actually went into being a judge thinking I'll do it for 2 or 3 years, and then I'm going to go back to being a lawyer and doing what I really liked. But one thing led to another, and I was a judge for almost 40 years. And it was because in the course of that work, there was always an opportunity to educate, an opportunity to change the way that people thought, the opportunity to investigate something that nobody else had investigated, or to investigate it in a way that nobody else had investigated. And so I liked those challenges. And I stopped fighting, of course, with lawyers, because that was not my proper role as a judge. So I started fighting with other judges. And some of the most interesting arguments that I had was with other judges. I can remember, and I've told people this story many times, when I was first appointed a judge, I was barely there a month or two when one of the judges had been on the court for quite a while said, well, Sinclair, he said, everybody knows the only reason you were appointed a judge is because you're a native guy. And I said, right away, without hesitating, everybody knows you were appointed a judge because you're a white guy. So where does that leave us? And I was a better lawyer than you were, I said. So the important thing is not to be afraid and not to allow people to push you around. Stand up for yourself, and if you know who you are, then you're able to do that best. And so I didn't hesitate when I had the opportunity to do what was there in front of me to do, to stand up and do it, because I would look around and I would say nobody else was as capable or had any capacity to do this in a way that I could do it. So one of the interesting ironies, and I know this is kind of a long question to a simple answer, but sorry, a long answer to a simple question, but I was appointed a judge on Friday of March the 3rd in 1988. And the following Tuesday, the government was defeated in a vote of non-confidence, and J.J. Harper was shot. And he was the cause of the calling of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry. And because the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry was called, they asked me if I would be one of the commissioners for that, and I said, absolutely. And so I didn't actually work as a judge normally works for about 5 years. But during the time that I was doing the AJI work, it was fascinating to be able to reveal to the public through the media, because we had some good media interest and support, through the media, what it was that Indigenous people had experienced and were thinking about with regard to the justice system. And so that was an opportunity that I could not give up on. And it was in many ways a bit serendipitous, because if I had not been a judge, I probably wouldn't have been asked to co-chair that inquiry. But there you go. And the rest, they say, is history, you know.
Thank you so much. Might pass it back down to Alan for the next question.
Ask me another question, I'll give you another 45-minute answer.
As a former Canadian senator, Manitoba judge, lawyer, and as we know today, a fighter, you spent the majority of your career in leadership roles in historic institutions. Given your experiences, what are the moral obligations required of Canadian leaders?
Well, that's a good question.
I harken back again to my grandmother. My grandmother was my guardian because my mother passed away when I was a year old. And so she raised me and my brothers and my sister. But she was already in her 60s when we went to live with her. And so what she did within our family was she created a child welfare system. She gave responsibility to one of the aunts to be responsible for each of us. So she ran a system, and she was the head of the house in many important ways. My grandfather was an important figure too, but he let the household be totally in her hands. And when I wanted to go to university and she had to sign the papers to let me go to university, she said, "I'll sign these papers, but you have to promise me that you will always use your education to help people." And so that became my guiding light, that I always wanted to help people, and I always saw myself as being someone who needed to help people. And in fact, I often stop and help the homeless. I make sure that I donate lots of money to the homeless charities that are working with the homeless, because they're often there because of no reason that's their fault. And so I do what I can to continue to help people. But I would say that as a judge, the thing that judges needed to believe, I found, was that they could have a positive impact, that justice can be part of the healing process for individuals. And so getting judges to understand that eventually led, I think, to the amendments to the criminal code in 1996, which led to the Gladio principle. And that is that before you send somebody to jail, or before you sentence an individual who's indigenous, you have to understand everything about them, because there's often more to them than meets the eye. So it is important as well to maintain your sense of self and to take care of yourself. And I do that through ceremony. I do that through the work I do with elders. I have several elders who I consult with regularly just to talk with, and we hold our own sessions to give ourselves the strength to continue to do the work that we do. So what's important is to establish your sense of identity as early as you can, and that is to know your history, to know where you're going, to know why you're here, to know who you are, and then to use that to help you direct the work that you do. And never back away from your identity and your sense of responsibility to your community, because there are little children who see you in a certain way, for whom you are standing up. When I was growing up, there was no Indigenous lawyers, never mind Indigenous judges. And so I always thought, when I was the lawyer in law school and after law school, I always thought it's important that these children see me as somebody that can be what they can be. And so I go to schools a lot. I speak to students a lot. I speak to university students a lot, only because I want them to understand that they are valid. No, I'm not sure if that answers your question or not. But
It does, and thank you for that. I think it's always inspiring for yourself to speak to the youth, because you are that role model and that leader that we all need. For the next question, I want to pass it on to Mavis, if you're willing to do the next question.
So as a mentor, what advice do you find yourself giving to young people or anyone trying to affect change?
Probably one of the most, with law students in particular, with the Indigenous law students, one of the most common questions I get is, how can I do this and still be true to my sense of self? And I say, well, it's a good question to ask. It's a good question to think about, because you have to have a good sense of your own identity and your own sense of where you come from. Every student who's in law school knows why they're there and knows what they're going to end up being or becoming. Most of them, in fact, have strong connections in the legal community already, being judges' sons or lawyers' sons or daughters. And therefore, they know that when they graduate, they're going to go practice law in dad's law firm. So they're not worried about that. But for Indigenous lawyers, it's a little different. And so one of the things I tell them is that when I was a young lawyer, I thought for a little while that I was going to quit because I didn't like the way the law system treated my clients. I didn't like the way the judges treated me. I didn't like the way that lawyers on the other side, prosecutors in particular, were treating me. So I kind of had that moment of weakness where I was about to give up. But when I spoke to an elder friend who was a very wise man, I went to see him about it, and he said, your problem is that you've been educated totally in that Western world. And that's good, he said, because you need to understand that if you quit law and you go become a carpenter, you will always be a carpenter who knows the law. And they're going to come and ask you questions anyway, and you're going to have to give them some answers. So just understand that that obligation or that commitment or that work that you have worked so hard to achieve is never going to go away just because you walk away from this position. But he said, understand this as well, that the reason that you're feeling the way that you're feeling now is because you feel that you're not getting the respect that you deserve. And maybe you don't get the respect that you deserve because you're not giving yourself the respect that you deserve. And so you have to learn about the importance of respect and what the teaching of respect is. And what that means is that you now have to learn what it means to be Anishinaabe, what it means to be an Indigenous man. And so that involves going to elders and attending ceremonies and participating with elder groups and discussions about the kinds of things that I was dealing with and other professionals were dealing with as well. And so I started doing that. And at that time, I was about, I guess, 30 years of age. And I was going to say it changed my life, but it didn't. It solidified my life. It made my life stronger. It made me stronger because whenever I would run into those very same difficulties that I had run into before, I always thought, I'm going to find a way to change this. I'm going to find a way to ensure that this does not continue to happen in this way. And so in subsequent years, after the AJI was finished, I became a faculty member of the National Judicial Institute, which trains all judges in Canada. And I ran programs and talked to them about the importance of understanding their impact as judges on the Indigenous community and what it was that the Indigenous people who were coming in front of them, whether in child welfare court, whether in the criminal justice system, or whether in the civil system, what they were thinking about in terms of the legal system and their participation in it. And I think that had an impact upon them. So it was important to keep my sense of self strong and to keep strengthening it, because otherwise, you know, there's been a lot of serious things that have come to my attention or that have occurred in the course of my work. When we were doing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for example, it was not unusual for us to hear that a survivor who had spoken to us last week had passed away this week. And that becomes a little overbearing. It becomes a little difficult to cope with when you lose people with whom you develop a sense of fondness or a sense of connection to in such an open and honest way, and then suddenly they're not there. And that happened many times. And so you have to learn how to cope with that. So we had to have good spiritual supports, we had to have good mental health supports as commissioners, and we had to have good family supports. And we had to ensure that our families also had those supports, because, as I said to my colleague commissioners at the beginning, that the reason you have to have that is because some days they're going to see you sitting out on your deck or sitting out in the yard thinking about something, and they don't know why you're crying. And so they have to know what it is that you're going through. So be sure that you always share this experience with them. So we included the families, our families, in attending the hearings and listening to the hearings as well, because that sense of inclusion makes them feel part of what it is that we do and who it is that we are as well.
Well, thank you. I'll pass it back to Alan.
Well, this is a perfect segue now that we spoke about the TRC. And for me, I think this is something really interesting when I'm looking at Canadian society. In your address of the TRC report to all of Canada, you said, and I quote, "We have described for you a mountain. We have shown you the way to the top. We call upon you to do the climbing." As you stand today and you look at that mountain, how do you think the ascent is going?
Well, that's a good question. And I recall your comment in your opening introduction. It is often easy for us to fall back on the thought that it's not moving fast enough and that nothing's happening, when in reality, profound change is taking place in this country and has taken place, and we now have to learn how to take advantage of it. Because people in this country do not see Indigenous people in the same way anymore. People in this country do not see the Canadian officials who were in place over the history of this country in the same way anymore. People will be able to understand that the relationship has not been as harmonious as we have all been led to believe, or we were all led to believe back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, that there were historical conflicts, there were historical acts that were done that were bad, not only bad, but had such a negative impact that sometimes people died. And so the important thing is to understand that, and one of the other things I said at the final work of the TRC was, it took us 150 years, 11 generations of people to get to this point in terms of our relationship. It may take us that long to fix it, and we have to recognize that. But with each generation, we have to ensure that they are educated about this issue in such a way that they will commit to fixing it at every step of the way. And so let us not get too caught up in the fact that we didn't suddenly snap our fingers and everything was perfect. It never is like that. In any negative relationship where the perpetrator is still in charge and the victim is still at the bidding, in some ways, of the perpetrator, until the victim and the perpetrator are in an equal situation, in an equal position, then things will always be difficult,
between them. It's that relationship that we have to change, and relationship we have to fix. But in the same way, before we can get to a relationship of mutual respect that calls for, we have to understand that there is an important step of self-respect that Indigenous people have to go through, because Indigenous people have had their sense of self damaged so badly that they often don't see themselves with the same sense of validity that they would be seeing themselves but for this history. So that sense of self-respect we need to regain through language development in the schools and in the communities, through cultural understanding, through cultural teachings, through the use of elders to advance for our community what it is that we really stand for, what it is we really know, and to look at returning back to our roots as a people. And each of our tribal entities have our own roots, and we need to understand what they are, and we need to ensure that they are not only protected, but that they are solidified and advanced. And so I would say that's going to take a long time. It took a long time to destroy it. It's going to take a long time to fix it. These instant changes that governments look for, such as passing a law to change the child welfare system or passing a law to declare Indigenous Day in Canada, they're good too, but they're not anywhere near what it is that we need to do.
Thank you for that. It's definitely crucial and key, as you talked about, the effort of language revitalization, culture, and even just having Mavis and Aiden here is just kind of a testament to where we're going. So I really liked what you had said in terms of this incremental change. I just want to wrap up, and on behalf of everyone who's attending the ceremony, thank you. Willalan, Your Honor, we appreciate your determination, bravery, tenacity to make this world a better place. And with that, I believe we have closing remarks from Paul Chesser.
Yes.
Paul?
Thank you. Let me start just with wow. A really, really fantastic address. Thank you, Your Honor. I recall back in my some of my favorite teachers had the qualities, they were provocative, compelling, inspirational. Your message today of never backing down from principles or your identity, conducting yourself with such class and respect. I'm proud to list you now among the list of my favorite teachers. Thank you for sharing. I'm moved, and I'm feeling like I want more. I look forward to reading your book, to reviewing once again the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and can't wait to welcome you back to Concordia in person so you can connect with our students and our faculty who I know need to hear this message. It's such an important message to discuss at our university, but it's an important message that all society needs to hear. So thank you. Let me also take a moment to thank Alan, Aiden, and Mavis. I'd like to extend my gratitude to all the guests who've joined us today. One other thing, Your Honor, I want you to know, there's many people that have joined us online, and the chat box is full of words of appreciation. We are going to capture all of those messages and ensure that you receive them. So I encourage those people online to continue to post, because we will get those messages to Justice Sinclair. For those of you who would like to keep this conversation going, I encourage you to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Flickr at Concordia Alumni. And this brings today's session to a close. Merci et bonne journée.